Welcome to Comfort Habit number 2. This is my final video for tonight. I want to talk about crossover comics. Alright? I am one of these comic book fans who will not buy a comic book unless my main characters that I read are in it. And so here's like my top teams of comic books. So if they're not in a book that I don't have to buy, I'm not going to buy it unless it comes into like a trade book like the Inferno Saga. So the Inferno Saga, I'm using that as the prime example. The Inferno Saga crossed every X Team's book. It didn't venture off into the Avengers or any of the other superheroes. None of them were involved. This was purely X-Men shit. So just like in Fall of the Mutants, just like in Executioner Song, just like in what the hell was it? There was another one, Extinction Agenda. All those are X-Men sagas. All right. So when Fall of the Mutants was first, Fall of the Mutants was in every X title. I can't remember if it was in Excalibur, but it was damn sure New Mutants because they lost Doug Warlock. It damn sure was in X-Men. It was also in X Factor. All right. Now it would go back and forth between the three comics, and then when when the next one came, um Extinction Agenda. No, not Extinction Agenda. When Inferno Saga came, that went into all 5 X titles. Excalibur's not in my trademark, by the way, so I still have to find that. So it went from X-Men, New Mutants, X Factor, Excalibur, because I'm missing that one Excalibur, then back to X-Men, back to X Factor, back to New Mutants. And it went into that. So it's like 9 books or better. And the only ones I don't have in hand, it also went to X-Terminators. That's the team I'm missing. The only one I don't have in hand are the New Mutants one and the fucking Excalibur. Now I do have the New Mutants and X-Terminators, X Factor, X-Men in the big trade, the $86 book that I bought that's in this little thing here. Now I do have that. That's a big book. I've featured it on here once before. But as far as like when I found out Excalibur was in here, but it's not in the trade, I was kind of mad. So I missed one part of this thing, and I paid $86, and Excalibur's not in this damn thing. So that kind of hurt my feelings. But this is crossover books, you know. So to tell the whole story, instead of just putting everything in the X-Men, they went to all the X teams, you know. And the only team that didn't have like something to do, like and Fall of the Mutants, um, not Fall of the Mutants, Death in Dallas, because technically, yeah, that's Fall of the Mutants too. Because in Fall of the Mutants, Death in Dallas, where Forge had to kill the X-Men and turned them into legends thanks to Roma, because that end in X-Men, well, technically it ended in Excalibur, but it relaunched in X-Men because then the X-Men became legends, so that no cameras could pick them up. You could see them with your own eyes, but digital photos and shit, anything electronical, couldn't pick them up. So they could go anywhere they wanted and no one could see them because they became legends. And so whenever you had picked up an X-Men book and you seen the words X-Men live, it means that the X-Men were dead, but they were no longer dead. But they were dead to technology. Technology couldn't pick them up. And that's when they went off and moved from New York to Australia. Alright? Then Extinction Agenda happened. And then it was either Executioner Song. Yeah, I think it was Executioner Song. It's different orders, and my old ass can't remember them. But I know Fall of the Mutants was first. That's like maybe 4 or 5 comics. Most of it X-Men. Then Inferno. Because Inferno happened after they moved to Australia. So it's Fall of the Mutants, Inferno Saga, then Extinction Agenda, and then Executioner Song. I probably got the orders mixed up with Extinction Agenda, Executioner Song. I'm pretty sure Executioner Song was last because Cable was there, and that only it went through X-Men, X-Force, not X-Force, X-Men, New Mutants, X Factor. I don't think Excalibur had anything to do with it, and I'm pretty sure it was like maybe 9 books. So I might not have them all then. But I know I have at least 9 books. Same thing with Executioner Song. It went through 9 books because Legion was trying to kill Xavier. And Cable and Strife was fighting, and then they thought that Cable was trying to kill Xavier, but it was actually Strife disguised as Cable. It's a long story, but anyway, because Strife is a clone of Cable. So, they did some shit, and you'd have to go through there. So those were crossover comics. Now, Guardians of the Galaxy, I don't remember them ever having a crossover. If they did, I don't have it. But I did read Guardians of the Galaxy. New Warriors, they didn't have crossovers, but they had mini books. Like, so Night Thrasher had 2 sagas before they offed Dwayne Taylor and decided to put Donald Taylor instead and got rid of. I have no idea who the current Night Thrasher is, and I really don't care because I don't even know if New Mutants still exist. When the X-Men and all the writers had their big issue where all the X titles started getting like fucked up, so they had to go on hiatus, and that's how you got Exiles and all the other titles where they started spelling everything with the EX, and the only thing that didn't change was Excalibur, because Excalibur was already spelled EX. No, and I think they may have changed that and put an X and called it Excalibur the same way they did the Extreme, who was Adam X. So, shit like that. But whenever a book crossed over, because as much as I liked Excalibur, I didn't read that shit. No. I liked them when I first started reading them. I collected like maybe 1 or 2 runs, and it just wasn't my thing. And the only reason why I liked Excalibur was because Kitty Pryde and Nightcrawler were X-Men, and Rachel Summers, those were the 3 founding members of Excalibur, and they went over there and started talking to Brian Braddock, and then they built Excalibur, and they worked out of his mansion. So, that's kind of how that worked. And then all of a sudden, Cullen came, Cersei came, Lockheed came back, all kinds of people. And by the time I stopped reading Excalibur, there was at least 13 members of Excalibur. Give or take a member or 2. But Excalibur never really dealt with the shit the X-Men really dealt with. They were like that side team. They never really confronted the MLF like talking about it. So I didn't really read them because their enemies was kind of cookie cutter compared to X-Men dealing with the MLF and dealing with Magneto and shit. Excalibur would make an appearance every now and again. And then I do I really want to buy it? And then Excalibur kept getting canceled. Now, Excalibur is the only X-Men book that has been canceled more times than I can count. And then, for Power Pack, if they had a crossover, I would go buy that. But Power Pack fizzled out in the mid 80s and just kind of never came the fuck back. They did try to make the Power Pack grown. That shit didn't work out. So they got rid of it and they never put the Power Pack back. Now, anything the Spider-Man crossed over in, I wouldn't have got it. Because if it wasn't Spider-Man, I would have never been an X-Men fan. And then I became more of an X-Men fan than a Spider-Man fan. So, and then the Clone Wars happened again. And then the Clone Saga happened again. And then Maximum Clonage happened again. So, and then Ben Reilly came back. So, it's like, okay, what the fuck, So then they did all the stuff, and everything that Spider-Man, X-Men, and New Warriors, and Guardians of the Galaxy, those was like my main comics. Also Alpha Flight. And then I didn't really buy any Omega Flights or Beta Flights because I really just liked Alpha Flight. But then they started splitting them up so that Alpha Flight could have a more expanded team, the same way they did the X-Men with X-Force, X-Factor, and Excalibur. Now, X-Terminators became members of X-Factor and X-Force, alright, because in the MLF, because Boom Boom went to X-Factor, Richter went to X-Force, Skids and Rusty became members of the MLF. So they basically said, fuck you to the X-Men, but they never fought the X-Men when the MLF had to deal with the X-Men. It's like, no, we're not fucking with them because those are our family. So, they had decent things they had to deal with. But, so, like, crossover books, alright? My first introduction to Ghost Rider, because the first Ghost Rider I knew was Dan Kitch. I did not like him. But because he had to deal with the X-Men in the crossover, I had to go buy his book. It's like, because it would go X-Men, Ghost Rider, X-Men, Ghost Rider, X-Men. Same thing with Luke Cage. I still had to buy a Cage book. I can't remember the title. I had to go through my Silver Sable books. Because it was Silver Sable, Luke Cage, possibly Deathlock, and then back to Silver Sable. Because I have the first part is at Silver Sable and the last part is Silver Sable. But these are crossover books, and you have to buy the crossovers to get the whole story because Marvel wasn't smart enough to, hey, let's just make these motherfuckers trades. Same thing with like Secret Wars. With Secret Wars, you went to Spider-Man, Avengers, Spider-Man, West Coast Avengers, East Coast Avengers. You kept going through that. Same thing with Infinity Gauntlet, same thing with Infinity Watch, same thing with Infinity Wars. You had to keep going from book to book to book to book. And it's a good way to make money, but it would have been better if you just put it all in one big ass trade book and solve the problem. Secret Wars 2, same shit. So, you have to go through all this shit. And this isn't the fucking 80s, yo. This is way back. This is like 82 to 86. This is when all this shit's going on. By the time you hit the 90s and you hit the Inferno Saga, you done found out what the fuck crossovers are. And that's why I went to Ghost Rider, because it was in the 90s where he worked with the X-Men. It was Dan Ketch at that same time. The original Ghost Rider was working with Blade and working with Morbius and God damn it, Black Cat. And that was the Night Stalkers. I never knew Johnny Blaze was the original Ghost Rider until after my bro Daryl at Kegler's was like, yo, Johnny Ketch ain't the original Ghost Rider. I said, well, it's the only one I know. He's like, yeah. But the original one's Night Stalker. If you read the Night Stalkers, you'll find out about that. Because Night Stalkers, it's like, Night Stalkers, what the fuck is Night Stalkers? So you bought the book, and I read the book, and it's like, okay. So Night Stalkers is Johnny Blaze, Blade, Eric Brooks, and Morbius, and every now and again, Black Cat would be like their liaison, because Black Cat actually was an Avenger back when this was going on, and she would switch back and forth. But Black Cat also was once a bad guy in Spider-Man, so you see all the things, and then when it came to the Avengers, you had the East Coast Avengers, the West Coast Avengers, you had the Space Avengers that was led by Captain Marvel, the Black Lady Monica Rambeau, and then you had it's like the North Avengers and the South Avengers. Those comics didn't last very long, but you had them. So you had like four corners of Avengers, because Captain America ran the Avengers on the East Coast, and then Tony ran the Avengers on the West Coast. And every now and again, James Rhodes would go from back and forth as War Machine, and sometimes he doubled as Iron Man when he was on the East Coast. And then, if you go further in, you'd still have to buy crossover books. And they still had the main Avengers book lined up, still selling just in case. But everything would all kind of collide in. So, like, if you had the Infinity Sagas, you'd have to go from book to book to book to book to book to book to book. So when you go to crossover books, you'd have to cross over all these books just to find out to get the whole fucking story. So, and I have the Infinity Gauntlet, or the Infinity Watch saga, and I have the Infinity War. I'm pretty sure it's two sagas, but I keep calling it Infinity Gauntlet, but it was technically called the Infinity Watch. And after the Infinity Watch, the Infinity Wars came. So, I mean, there's like, I think both of them are 12 books. I know the Secret Wars is at least 12 books, because it was a whole year saga. And I could be wrong there, but I'm pretty sure it was a whole year saga. If you're a comic fan, you can correct me, and I have no problem being wrong. But the 80s was my youth, so I know for a fucking fact you had to buy crossover books in the early 80s. As far back as 1982 is when they started crossing over books. That's when they could start like dropping books like twice a month, because the X-Men with Fall of the Mutants, they dropped books twice a month, and they started that shit, and they kept doing that shit until the early 90s. And in the early 90s, they continued to do it until the mid 90s and the late 90s, when they started coming out with the X-Men, because every X-Men book before that was Uncanny X-Men, and the only other X-Men book that was on sale was Classic X-Men. So you get the Classic X-Men and the Uncanny X-Men. That was it. Everything else was New Mutants and X-Factor and Excalibur. That's it. And anything else was Alpha Flight, and then mid 90s, late 90s, you got Omega Flight and Beta Flight, along with Alpha Flight. But just like Excalibur, Alpha Flight has been canceled more times than I can count too. So eventually, when your favorite comics get canceled, you kind of stop reading. Because I love Cloak and Dagger. They also had crossover books with Spider-Man. So if you didn't like Cloak and Dagger, and they had a crossover with Spider-Man, and it started as Spider-Man, it generally ends in Spider-Man, so you have to go buy Cloak and Dagger just to see how that shit happens, because he's teamed up with them too. And so, it's just one of them things. And so you'd have to buy crossover books. And all of this started for this video because some asshat came at me in the comments about there were more menacing villains than Thanos. So I'm going to go make that TikTok now. Thank you guys for watching, and because this video has taken so long, I am probably not going to play Mass Effect and opt for a shower and the bed. Alright? Thank you very much. Thank you all 241 of you. I greatly appreciate you. Much love to you. I'm Echo Fan Grey Wolf, and this is how I ended the last video that didn't fucking record. So I'm gonna hit it with this. Shazam!